Dinesh, before we talk about the book and the film, because I admire you so much as a thinker. Put in perspective yesterday Donald Trump's speech about how he would take on and defeat ISIS.
I think Trump is breaking new ground in the way that he looks at American foreign policy generally. He's quite right about ISIS. The argument that what Hillary has done and Obama is they've created an environment in which ISIS can thrive. I actually said something like this in my Obama film 4 years ago, that we're going to see the emergence of a United States of Islam, and ISIS is literally trying to recreate the Islamic caliphate across the Middle East. Obama's let this happen. Hillary has let this happen. And Trump is saying that, look, this is the biggest threat that we face in the world right now. I think he's quite right about that.
In your film, by the way, the film's absolutely stunning in the book. You paint a quite bleak picture of what Hillary's America would look like. But when you really go back and look at your throughput, you called most of these shots about your description of what Obama in 2016. I mean, Dinesh, what did you get wrong in your film about Obama and the 2016? Every time I went back and looked at it, you were just about dead spot on everything, weren't you?
Well, that film is actually, in a way, creepier to watch now than
Exactly.
it was when I released it 4 years ago, because it has that glimmer, that kind of thinking glimmer of recognition. And, I think I did get Obama right. But in the end of the day, Obama and Hillary, although they have certain common aspects to them, are different. Obama, I believe, is an ideologue. His ideology is pathetic, it's destructive, it's twisted. But poor man, he believes it. He thinks he's making the world better. Now, Hillary, I think, ultimately, the Clintons are like Bonnie and Clyde. They're gangsters who are on the make. They've been on the make since the Arkansas days. And so with them, what you get is not an ideological vision of foreign policy or domestic policy. Rather, it's an indifference to both. They're essentially trying to figure out what's in it for me. How can we rent out American foreign policy to the highest bidder? How can we accumulate money and power for ourselves? In some ways, that's even scarier than a misguided idea.
So, Dinesh, and to support that, you lay out the intellectual infrastructure for it. They come with their tax returns the other day. They've made 230. By the way, even the conservative media, things up the Washington Times and Breitbart pick it up. None of the left media. Their gross income since leaving the White House is $238 million gross, almost $250 million, Dinesh. Okay, Dinesh, they didn't take a high-tech company public. They didn't do a leverage buyout. They didn't have a media company they sold. They didn't have mass real estate holdings or agriculture holdings. They didn't, They didn't do a leverage recap. They're basically grifters that sell influence. But $250 million, does that show a level of criminality, just a mindset? I'm not saying they have crime. There probably are crimes in there, but I'm saying, is the mindset a mindset of a criminal?
It is. It's, I grew up in India, as you know, Steve. My wife's from Venezuela. We both grew up in countries run by gangs. Gangs that run the slums, gangs that run politics. People go into politics to make money. So this stuff represents the gangsterization of America. Now, we've seen some of it in America before, but it tends to be at the local level. Think of Tammany Hall 100 years ago. The Democratic politician Boss Tweed, he'd loot the Treasury, he'd give contracts to his buddies. This kind of thing was going on at the local level, but the Clintons have actually taken it not only to the national but the international level, and their modus operandi is really familiar. Overpay Bill ridiculously for a speech, a 15-minute speech for $500,000. Then Hillary modifies American policy in line with what the donor wants, and then tens of millions of dollars flow into the Clinton Foundation. You can see this system followed again and again and again and again, and our buddy Peter Schweitzer has chronicled it as gruesomely as anyone else.
Here's the thing I don't get, Dinesh. You write a book, it's a number one bestseller. Peter writes a book. You write a Hillary's America that walks through this whole thing. Peter writes a book, Clinton Cash, number one bestseller. Got a graphic novel out, number one graphic novel. You do a movie, massive hit movie. Peter, we do a movie, put it up online. It's got 3 million downloads, and WikiLeaks puts it out. It's to 11 million people. What am I missing about the Trump campaign that they have not said, hey, I think Dinesh has got something going on over there. I think those guys at GAI, this is pretty interesting. She made $238 million, and Dinesh has laid it all out about how they think. Why do you think still the mainstream media it's not forced on them that they have to cover it more than just Ben Smithing? It was said, well, we had a segment on that 3 days ago. Why are they not forced to cover this nonstop?
You know, it's unbelievable. If you look at CNN or the networks, NPR, you wouldn't even know that my movie or your movie exists. They're pretending it doesn't. They're hoping it goes away. Now, in some ways, that doesn't totally surprise me. But what does surprise me is that, like, I haven't heard a whisper from the RNC. Now, if I were Michael Moore, the whole Democratic Party would have moved behind me to push this movie, to get it out to independent voters, to have it seen by Latinos and blacks and so on. So what those guys are doing, we're doing a kind of messaging using the media of film that the RNC doesn't even begin to know how to do. It's a completely different medium. You think we've done the messaging. You think they'd take advantage of it.
It's pretty unbelievable. Dinesh, one last thing before we let you go. Because your thing was that, why do you think Bernie, because we've seen this seething anger on the left, and one of the things we say is this split between the kind of the populist nationalist and the Republican Party and the globalist. You've got the same thing over there with kind of some of these Bernie Sanders people who by the way, have embraced, parts of your book, and they've embraced parts of Peter Schweizer's film. Why did Bernie Sanders not go, trying to be the good government socialist? Why did he not go after Hillary Clinton on what clearly could have been a winning thing for him, to go after her cronyism, her corporatism, and her corruption, and how the Democratic Party's really been shanghaied by a group of ideological leftists, but also corporatists?
Because I think in the end of the day, these guys, including Bernie, and I would say this is also true of James Comey, at the end of the day, these guys are careerists. And they saw the writing on the wall, and they recognize that they have a brighter future with the Clintons than running against them. And so they decided to be good boys. I understand Bernie's just bought a $600,000 pad for himself. So, it's deep sleeping on your neighbor's couch for 20 years.
Dinesh, last thing. Tell us where else about the film. How's it going to stay on distribution? Are you going to go on digital? Tell us about the book. Are you speaking tours? Where else can people get access to you?
The book has done great. It's #1 in the New York Times bestseller list, I'm thrilled to say. The movie is, it's faded a little bit. It was in 1,200 theaters. It's now in about 300 theaters. We're going to expand our theatrical reach next month to about 500 theaters. That's because there were just big Hollywood movies this summer that crowded us out a little bit. We come out in DVD a month before the election. And so I'm very excited about this movie. Still has the potential to change things dramatically if Trump and the RNC and the super PACs get behind it. The super PACs